Good late Tuesday, early Wednesday meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving a look at our Doppler across the region. Actually, we still see some lingering shower and storms toward Georgia, even at this late time frame here, around 2 a.m. or so. As we're tracking things, that's pretty intriguing to see here as we're monitoring the situation here across the region. I know you see a margin of risk now on the map. It just popped up for that day one convective outlook. As we look ahead into that Wednesday, there is a 1 out of 5 risk of some strong to, in this case, this would indicate maybe even some isolated severe storms. So we have to watch for that. Not really a tornado risk in general. You always have to kind of watch when we have some of the stronger storms this time of year because sometimes boundary interactions and the like. But as we're going through things, not really for hail too much. So again, you never know, but the wind risk is why that is indicated now and outlook there as we're looking towards some of those South Georgia communities, Southeast Georgia communities, especially there on the map. So that's where the focal point could be, but really all over the region we'll have to watch on that Wednesday. Definitely there is a risk. It's higher than it's been being here lately with these afternoon storms. We really haven't had this high of a risk since late last week, give or take. So just be mindful of that here as storms will be more prevalent here across the region. I know as we kind of broaden the view here, we're going to show you a margin risk going into South Carolina where it turns into a slight risk as we get toward the North Carolina border, give or take. You see Charlotte, Greensboro, and then in Virginia, Roanoke, Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Richmond, where there's some flooding ongoing right now, and then Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. I know there's been some tornado warnings up there as we were looking on that Tuesday, and then as we look up there, we have a risk for some hail, but the wind risk, the more predominant one. You see further out toward the west, you see a tornado risk parts of South and North Dakota. It's been a busy weather pattern as we'll get into just tragedy, in toward parts of Texas and Kirk County especially. There's so many reports of, heartbreak as we're looking out there. But as we kind of go ahead and look at more situations, Chicago did have a considerable flash flood warning not that long ago. As I go back 4 hours on the radar, we had storm action lingering around there, and then I'll go current. I don't see anything but 12-hour rainfall. It's, just sat right over Chicago there. As we're looking, we're talking about half a foot of rain, a few backyards there in a pretty short period of time, and there were some problems there toward that metro area here late on that Tuesday evening. Again, the rain now has moved out, but right there in the worst possible spot. So urban there and seeing big problems. And we had another problem, that was a flash flood emergency on that Tuesday in parts of New Mexico. Now we would have to go back further than this to see it, but let me go forward here and then I'll go 12-hour rainfall. And, we're seeing so many different spots there. This is a very flood-prone area here in general, but, it doesn't look like a whole bunch, just a few inches, but there's been problems because of burn scars from wildfires in that region. We had reports of river rises that were dramatic, similar in some ways to what we saw in Texas. I mean, they're more, unfortunately, used to it out there because they've had a lot of flash flood emergencies toward that area of New Mexico there. But there were reports, of some homes just getting caught up in that water and even seemingly maybe floating away, which is just awful. Thoughts and prayers out there with that flooding. Of course, the biggest story, we don't have anything too much in terms of rain there right now, is out toward that Kerrville County, or Kirk County, Kerrville area there. Just absolute tragedy. Just devastation there as you look. That Guadalupe River did something this horrible. Hunt, Ingram, those communities, we had a rise, of epic proportions out toward those areas. And we have just a unimaginable death toll out there, the likes of, nobody could have ever seen coming, really. As this keeps getting worse and worse. The latest numbers now, at least 110 dead according to reports, and 161 additional reported missing here. So hopefully some of those missing will be found alive, and maybe they weren't caught up in this. We'll see. But this would hint at a death toll that just keeps surging and getting higher and higher. One of the worst disasters in U.S. meteorological history here, or at least in modern times. But just awful because it wasn't something that was really, that big of a deal. Even we were on Thursday night, in the meteorology community, it was something that was really not being tied about that much. The local level, sure, they did a good job. Well, the service, Austin, San Antonio, really tried very hard to get the message out. Even Thursday afternoon with a flood watch in play there, they kept, up in the ante with their alerts as we looked through the night. A lot of folks fell asleep. I know we did mention it briefly, some of that threat starting to come into play in our very late Thursday night update, but I mean, by then so many people were asleep, and it was not something that, was really jumping off the page, but there was an alert there for some life-threatening flash flooding in that region at least, and how we did, briefly mention that here, but then, it took that turn for the worst way. Most people were asleep, and we're talking about, 4 in the morning, give or take, out that way, and that's why you gotta have ways to get alerts here. And even if folks had some of those ways to get alerts, I have a feeling that the cell service wasn't great out there. With that many people out there, holiday weekend, more people than normal. People that did have cell phones, they might have not got service. It was just the worst possible time frame, the middle of the night when most people are going to have probably all year out there pretty much toward the Guadalupe River. And even if there's phone alerts, I understand it as they went out. I mean, when you have a considerable warning, you're going to get those out. So in theory, that would give folks time, maybe hours, multiple, not, just unlimited time, but in the middle of the night, maybe a couple hours, give or take, to evacuate. But the problem was, it was when people, may have already had their phone and do not disturb, and or they might have not just been getting the cell phone signal at all out there. People going off the grid, that's one issue, but it may have not been getting that signal out there, to be quite honest, as we're looking at the situation. Just absolutely awful to think about here. And that's why no other radios save lives. Looking at the cover to that, my understanding is, that signal would have been received in that area, and that should have went off. And if anybody had those, they would have got, that message there. It would have woke them up. They are very noisy if you have them set with that tone there. And, you can do the tone, you can do the voice, depending on what you have. I know Midland and no other radios, I don't, have any stake in it. Some TV stations do, where they have deals with them and the like, to kind of, have sponsorships and the like. I mean, I don't have anything like that. My point being is those are very, very good weather radios. I've used that type here. I mean, I'm only 30. I've used that for about 20 years. So, different ones, a few here over the years when one will wear out. But my point is, that's the type of weather radio that you really want to have. They could be $34, $50, give or take, depending on where you're getting them. Some stores, have them, some don't. Sometimes you have to get them online. But there's no weather radios save lives. They're very, very important here. As you're looking, because that'll set alert off, and you don't, you might be saying, well, I don't want to, I live 2 counties away from there, they get alerts all the time. Well, these Midland no weather radios, they have a programmable setting on them here. First off, you want to find the channel that covers your area. I know in our region here, Stark, Gainesville is channel 4 on the no other radios. There's 1 through 7 on those, and it's number 4. 7 is Jacksonville's transmitter on that, mode there. There's some different frequencies, and that's just a better way to understand it. It's 4 for Stark, Gainesville. It's 7 for Duval County. I think Clay, they may overlap some there. I generally just have one set right now for Jacksonville, Gainesville. We turn it off when we're in coverage. If, for some reason, maybe, seeing something in the summertime, especially where, we're not paying attention to, every second. I have that up. So if, hear my alerts on my computer is great, but not, I have that as a backup method. That's the whole point here. You got to have multiple ways to get alerts. You got to have more than one tool in your toolkit to keep you, your friends, and your family safe. I know these flash flood warnings, rapidly worsening flooding is possible in these situations. I mean, total potential to quickly become, one where danger occurs there, and people and property are in trouble through a rapid water rise. Sometimes, as the case was there on that Friday, that fateful Friday, July 4th, 2025, that's going to live in meteorological infamy for decades. tragically, as that, what we had a considerable warning, then we had a catastrophic threat. Those trigger phone alerts. Maybe by the time the catastrophic threat was in play, it's a situation where, well, it was really underway by then, and the evacuation time might have not necessarily been there for a lot of folks, depending on where you were. But the considerable warning, it was out well ahead. I mean, if they would have got the alert, but I have a feeling the cell service is terrible out there based on what I've read. If you don't have, the type of signal there on your phone, to get that data, then you're not going to get the alert, and then you're going to have tragedy like what we had there. Unfathomable for modern times, 2025, to see something like this. I mean, to see, there was a little bit of a connection to Tropical Storm Barry out there, but I mean, this is just a worst case scenario all the way around. Toward Kirk County, Texas is absolutely awful, awful. I know there's flood warnings sometimes for those longer term flooding. They're still dangerous, but the flash ones, the flash flood warnings, I know you've got to just really pay attention to those. Those are the ones where we can, and especially in these vulnerable areas like Texas's hill country, that means rapidly worsening flooding is possible. And in that case, it happened. And we had just tragedy, 110 lives, at least lost, but 161 additional reported missing, according to Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And it's just heartbreaking, as we're looking there toward that region. Again, weather radios save lives. Very, very important here, with that. And that's why you can have your weather radio. You need that. But you also, of course, follow us here, for our local 62 counties. We're always on for the tornado warning storms, but then you also really want to make sure you have those wireless emergency alerts enabled on your phone. Plus, it's not a bad idea to have a weather app of some kind. There are different alert apps out there, that, can wake you up there, to alerts as well. Different kinds. They're customizable. We don't have one here, cloud weather at this point in time, but these are customizable alerts here that you can have to wake you guys up. So this is so important now. But if you don't have internet, then the only thing that'll really work is the weather radio, assuming you're getting a signal. Which, looking at the maps there, they covered maps. There were some different things where they were down last month, some, but instead of been working there, transmitter, I believe in Kerrville, should have been able to get a signal out there. I'm not there, I can't guarantee that, but folks had those on hand. Those tone alerts, those voice alerts, the combination. When you do voice, it's a tone and a voice, but that helps people be awakened here to the danger. They realize it's just not thunder and lightning, and rain. It's something worse. It's something where their life could be, in danger here. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. It's absolutely awful. So many young children here, in the early parts of their lives, they were lost in this terrible tragedy here. Girls' Camp Mystic, impacted just so severely with so many fatalities there. It's just absolutely awful. Weather radios, though, especially when Randy and I use over the years, are again, not that expensive, $30, $40, $50, give or take. Midland, and then it's the same programming that's on them. SAME here. That helps you customize the alerts for your different county. There's different codes. So if you are in Bradford County, but I don't, want to hear about, let's say, Columbia County there on that Gainesville transmitter, or any of the other counties, just all you want is Bradford. All you want is, the county you're in. You just set it to the, you don't do any. I know any is what I use because I want to have as many as I can on that one for our immediate area on the Gainesville transmitter. But you can transmit it to just, you can set it just to customizable, county by county codes. So you get the codes online, or they may still be in the packages. I haven't bought a new one lately because the ones I have right now are holding up pretty well. But I know it used to, I think there would be a booklet that would come with it. Now, maybe more online, but there's a code for each county in the country. If you just want Bradford, look up that code here, or wherever you are. We're in Bradford, but wherever you are in our 62 county area, and whichever transmitter you need. But my point is, get that code there for Bradford, Florida here, Bradford County, Florida, or whichever county area you want. You just put that code in there and then set it, and then whenever there's major alert will go off, and it will go off for watches. So that's one thing that, is helpful. But if there's tornado watches in the middle of the night, that would still wake you up. It's not a false alarm, but it's something that's not as imminent, maybe. But because you can't, as far as I know, customize the alerts on that, but you can customize the geography, and that's really helpful. And that would cut down on being, really awakened all the time here. It would be only for Bradford, whether there's a severe thunderstorm watch, tornado watch, but then those aren't as important in the middle of the night as a tornado warning, especially. But in severe thunderstorm warnings, and obviously, as we're talking about here, flash flood warnings, those are ones that are so important as well here, especially like if you're in a flood-prone area here. I mean, it's not impossible. It would be pretty hard to have anything that rivals what we had out in the Texas Hill Country out here, or North Central Florida, Bradford, I'm talking about specifically. I'm not saying it can't happen. We had Irma and Dora flooding, but you guys knew about that threat here in general coming ahead of time to some degree. So, it's still, though, we've had 5 inches in an hour or two. Sometime during the day. If it happens at night, though, then we could start having issues. And a lot of times flash flooding around here is more about driving in, to an area where, water's covering the road. Only 6 inches of water can knock you down here. I mean, and I'm about to say we had way, way more than that in Texas. As we're looking at things, you see, and it's just odd to have to compare it to storm surge here. But Cedar Key was terrible there with Helene, over 9 feet of record with that storm surge. But remember, they had time to evacuate and prepare. Granted, it didn't help the buildings there, really. But, it helped people to get out of harm's way, and not that many people were left behind there, out toward Levy County, Cedar Key area, and, Horseshoe Beach, 60 County, and the like. Whereas even a little worse than that. Wasn't 25 feet, though, and that's a different number now than we gave you. We're doing our Chantal landfall covered early Sunday morning. This has been revised here now. This has been revised based on some of the gauges. I think there were some issues. It's just the flooding was so bad they got messed up in terms of the data recording going on later on in the timeline. It was evaluated that the flooding was even worse than what the gauge was showing. It was about 20 in 2 hours, now 25 feet. The area is pretty similar along that river, 25 feet, rise in 2 hours. And that, and the flood stage, so the 25 feet there, just doing kind of the math on that, off the top of my head, the flood stage was at 10 feet, and then we went up about 25 feet, so, you go from, it was about 12, I think, when I took this number from it, to go 25 feet, so 12 plus 25 37, so you're more than 25 feet above flood stage there. So that means it's really a surge of that water coming in. I mean, this makes it even, worse than what I was saying, obviously, the other night. The 25 feet rise in 2 hours. Her story is even more, maybe shorter period of time than that. But the point is, that's still not much time. But if the flash flood warning acts and, was around there with the alerts earlier on, earlier in the night, granted, I mean, if you weren't up watching or having the ways to get alerts, you were in trouble, because that's just sadly how things kind of set up there. It was something that some people were aware of, but not as many as you would hope for, because this wasn't something that was expected to be as bad as it was. The rain, overachieved there in terms of the amounts, but still, if weather radios were going off, people would have had time to seek higher ground there and evacuate from those most vulnerable spots. As we're looking, I have a feeling that, folks weren't getting those wireless emergency alerts because the cell service is so bad. And if there's that many more people out there than normal, you're already pulling more on that. So, and some folks, maybe even if they were coming through, do not disturb, or some folks not even having them set on flash flood warnings. It was just a combination, worst possible time. Friday morning on July 4th, I mean, And, almost everybody asleep at that point. I mean, this wasn't like, 12 or 1 o'clock. This was way into the night when everybody's fast asleep, and then you have this tragedy. Because you hear the rain, you hear thunder. Well, there's not something tornadic, so we're going to get through it. But no, the water just rose like a tsunami, and it just caused total devastation and, heartbreak. And, buildings just wiped away. Campsites wiped away, RVs pushed around, people going down the river for miles. There have been some, stories of survival, but a lot more really stories of tragedy out there toward central Texas, toward Kirk County especially, as we're looking there. It wasn't storm surge directly, but my point is here, this graphic from NOAA really helps because, we had, 9 to 12 with Helene and Cedar Key, as we were showing you, but with this we had 25 feet, so that just wipes the homes off, the foundations here, and campsites, obviously, RVs, I mean, not going to be that high, but my point is, it just pushes everything, away. The force of the water is very, very powerful in these type of situations. Do not underestimate these, fast-moving pools of water here, really just fast-moving pushes of water. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. As we go ahead and say it right now, hurricane season, the remnants of Barry playing a role there. Santal, we left over to that, deadly in North Carolina, not near the extent of what we had in Texas, but still some flooding problems there. Some areas getting around a foot of rain in the worst case scenarios. Out there west of Raleigh, Chapel Hill was pretty hard hit, for instance. As we're looking, and Dexter's the next name on the list. We may have something we'll have to watch here as we look, closer to home here, as we look ahead in the timeline. But we're not going to focus too much on that right now because there's just a lot of uncertainty. But it's going to be pretty wet around here coming up. I know hurricane season runs to November 30th, so we have a long way to go here with that. And you see the tropical climatology. You see the peak season there, August to October, but these flooding events, just prove sometimes so tragic, whether it was directly or kind of just, kind of a hybrid type thing, but really something that was, had way much rain with it at points there, and then all of a sudden it interacted with another area out there and started, the remnants of Barry just all of a sudden, really sprung up on everybody and caused heartbreak. And I know, past situations, they had floods in the 80s there as well. One in 87, I believe, that was deadly toward that Guadalupe River. I know in our area in 94, we had Alberto. It was not, as bad as the Texas floods in terms of the death toll, but it was still terrible here for our area. With so many fatalities, southwest Georgia, with the flooding up there. It's absolutely heartbreaking. With Alberto in July of 94, we just passed that 31-year anniversary of that storm there, and it was something that was really impactful with river flooding again, really bad, but not what they had up there toward areas in Texas. But it's still horrific. Names should have been retired, to be quite honest. Alberto in 94. I know my late grandmother, my late paternal grandmother, was up there, and I think she had a detour of 50 miles because of the rain there, with the buckets of that, causing the flooding to close so many roads. There were stories of, it sounds so awful, but my understanding is there were caskets coming out of the ground there because the flooding was just so severe back there in July of 94 in the war parts of southwestern Georgia with Alberto, almost the exact same time of year, as what we had this time around with the remnants of Barry. So, granted, that was something more direct from it. This was, in 94, and this time around we were really not even talking about Barry, and I don't know that they would retire that name because it was just a player, and it, wasn't a direct cause in Adora in the Pacific wildfires. In Hawaii, it wasn't a direct cause, but it was a player in that as well. So, a couple of years ago there toward the Central Pacific, but a different Dora. I know in the Atlantic we don't use Dora, but they still had been using that there in the Central Pacific. So, as we go ahead and look here next 7 days, in terms of that rainfall forecast toward our area, we could have a good bit of rain. This is the time of year where you can get quite a bit of rain pretty quick, but in general, it'd be hard to have what we had out there toward Texas, happened toward north central Florida specifically. Southwest Georgia, a little bit different, as we talked about with Alberto. But where we're at, north central Florida, it'd be pretty hard. You know, the closest thing we had to any flood disaster around here, and it's still, you know, with as much rain as we got, it could have been a lot worse, was 2012 with a tropical storm Debbie. We had Hurricane Debbie last year, but 2012, we had a tropical storm Debbie come across and really just dumped like 20 inches of rain, you know, give or take, in a lot of backyard over a couple-day period. And that caused big problems, you know, river rises, creek rises, and the like. So, but many flash flood emergencies, that could have really been worse than what it was, even though those numbers were astronomical. But I know you can go to clutter.com/radar to get an interactive look at things. We're not on the air with that Doppler perspective. You see Florida's peninsula getting quite a bit of rain. We need the rain. They needed the rain in Texas. They had drought problems in that area, and instead, you know, just, I mean, you get 17 inches, whatever, depending where you're at, in that sort of period of time in a hilly area, and then everybody's right by the river that rises 20-something feet in 2 hours. And you know, that's just going to be a, you know, just a terrible, you know, discussions here about, you know, the tragedy here for years to come. I know we've had historic flood events in this country before. You know, I go back to Pennsylvania years ago. I believe it was Johnstown, Pennsylvania. As we're looking years ago, we had terrible flooding up there. I mean, many years ago. As I'll just look that up real quick as we're live on the air with you right now. Yeah, the Johnstown flood. We had a couple, I believe, actually. So this is something here. Let me just go over it. So there was one in 1889 in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And let me go ahead and find the death toll. I think there was one in the 70s as well. So that's a flood point area in the country as well. You know, Guadalupe River there has so many problems toward Texas. This was the worst one probably, you know, by far based on the death toll there. You know, unless there's one I haven't seen, you know, and reading back on it. But in Johnstown flood there in Pennsylvania, over 2,000 people died in 1889. There was a failure of a dam. I know that, you know, is something that was even worse than Hurricane Katrina there in modern times. We had over 1,000 fatalities toward Louisiana. And then there was the 1977 flood there in Johnstown, Pennsylvania as well. And it looks like 78 people died there in that one. So, some folks have a different number. I see 78 from the Weather Service. There's another number, history.com says 84. But the point being, you know, they're in the country that has to be aware of these floods. You know, that's an area that, you know, really flood prone as well. You see rainfall forecast coming up, Virginia there, quite a bit of rain. We have flooding right now and going toward Richmond, Virginia. Not considerable catastrophic at this point. We just have to stay aware here of these rapidly changing conditions. Let me go ahead and look here. You know, Richmond last hour, not that much really, but you add it up, you know, over a period of time. It's got to be aware of that. Let's get local. We just seen a special weather statement pop up here towards southeast Georgia. This is very late for something like that. Almost never happens here this late, but let me go ahead and pull it up on our other mode here. Let me pull in the clock as well, since this is live. We have, you know, something that's trying to get severe here at 2:30 in the morning. We didn't have any warnings on that Tuesday here locally, but this one here, we had quite a few significant other advisories, but to happen at 2:30 in the morning, pretty unusual there on Hoboken. Some wind enhancement there, 40-mile-an-hour gust, and minor flooding to heavy rainfall. So it's mainly about Hoboken right now. 1 hour rain, an inch or so there, and storm total, well, not much more than that, but around Hoboken in parts of our southeast Georgia communities, we're seeing some of this rain right now. Brantley County and Pierce County included in that as well. You see some more lighting up toward Patterson right now, up in Pierce County, you know, more, you know, clearly, but See in eastern Atkinson County a little bit of lightning right now. So kind of interesting to see that pop up here this late at night. A special weather statement. We have a little bit of lightning, toward parts of Taylor County as well. Let's go to the Tallahassee radar for this. So this might be a sign of, of a pretty wet period ahead for us, But, as we're looking later in the day is when we'll have more developments. Let me go ahead and jump back to the rainfall forecast. I know locally, we're expecting a decent amount of rain. I mean, on average, toward like Stark and Gainesville, 2 inches or so. Toward parts of southeast Georgia, close to 3 or 4. As we're tracking things there. So that's a good bit. Like Charlton County is what this is showing. So again, we're just going to keep on looking at the situation here very carefully. I know toward central Florida here, you see south of Orlando, this is a little bit of a, pulse up, but it could be anywhere in that region, really. It's quite a bit more of an active rainstorm pattern, and when it's not stormy, it can be pretty hot. You got to be using that extra caution when you're outside as well for an extended period in that heat. When you're not having the lightning around, you have to go indoors when you hear that rumble of thunder or rumbles of thunder. You have that heat danger around, and that's something we have to drink plenty of water and take frequent breaks. So, and we got to watch out. Even I know Tuesday night there, minor league baseball game in Jacksonville, there was a lightning strike, and it was very close to the stadium there. But you could hear the rumble of thunder on a feed of that, and for whatever reason, my understanding is they kept on playing. So, as we go ahead and, just got to remember whenever thunder roars, go indoors here. Very, very important. Lightning can be deadly. Not saying it was something, sometimes you can get a bolt and it wasn't the blue there, but my point being is you don't necessarily have to have rain to get lightning. That can be dangerous or deadly, but once you have one, within an 8-mile radius, generally, it's a good rule of thumb, you got to take action immediately because there could easily be another one that pops up. Gotta wait 30 minutes. I mean, that's, something that is protocol here in really sports, generally. So that was a surprise to see there. But as we go ahead and see here the covered area, I know we're in Bradford County. We're always watching things to see, how things progress to across the 62 counties. It's all about protecting you, your friends, and your family. You have Facebook, Casey Cloud Cloud Weather. You have Twitter / Cloud Casey. You have YouTube at Cloud Weather. You have Twitch Cloud Weather. And you have the website cloudweather.com. So, again, very important to stay on top of things here as we're tracking the situations. We have those warnings. There are thunderstorm warnings. If we see some of those pop up or something at a lower level, flash flood warning, maybe just post about them. But it's a little bit more significant looking, or obviously if there's tornado warning, we're always on the air to give you guys the very latest here. It's very important. We're going to start seeing an uptick in rain and storms. Now, will that be an uptick in warnings as well? It might be this time of year at peak heating. But sometimes you get too many storms and too much rain to get warnings. And, some days within that sequence, but some days can be pretty active with warnings. This is the time of year you can get them. You got to be prepared. The damage and wind gusts, a possibility. We have that margin risk in southeast Georgia today, both southeast central Georgia as well. So just be prepared whenever thunder roars. Go indoors. And then as we go ahead and look here, let's see that forecast for the next 7 days. 70% chance of rain on that Wednesday there. 60% on that Thursday, and then it drops a little bit. But then, it's going to be hot. 93, 94. For those highs, and then we're going to see the uptick in rain and storms. But early next week, there might be some type of low pressure type feature we'll need to watch. Here, is it going to be tropical? I didn't, put that here, watching the tropics yet, but maybe getting pretty close to that here. We'll see. Some of them guidance showing something. We're not turning logo red here right now. We did have a red for a few days there, the aftermath of the Texas floods from, late Thursday, early Friday. Early Friday. We had some more of that early Saturday. So we had the logo red for that. And more, it was deadly there. And then we had, Chantal. But still some pretty nasty weather. You got to be paying attention to your local weather as well. We're always watching our 62 counties, and we're covering national situations, as it appears, apparent that there's a danger. But, sometimes we can have just so many flash flood warnings it's not something, at 4 in the morning on holiday that you're going to necessarily jump on for if it's, across the country, unless it's really apparent that, something's happening, like a tornado emergency or something. So that's why you got to follow your local people as well. Our area, I'm one of those local people for 62 counties, and we cover the national threats as we can, the tornado emergencies. That stuff's more apparent than sometimes the flash flooding, middle of the night and a holiday, no less. The, total devastation for those poor folks there. And it's heartbreaking. Had a flood 2010 there toward Arkansas where folks died on a campground there, I believe. Flooding, not near as many as Texas, but still, so many lives being impacted by flash flooding over the years, these river rises and the like. And you just got to be very, very cognizant. Nobody's to blame here, but you just got to be really paying attention to these type of situations as we're tracking things here, as we're monitoring the situations here. You just got to stay weather aware and weather alert. It's tragedy, absolute tragedy here. It's all about having an alert method. As you look ahead, depending on where you are in the country, sometimes you use a storm sirens, not necessarily in our area, but, sirens that can help if people are close to them. Camping, it would really help, I would think. Now, a lot of times, like in the Midwest, sirens, you can't hear them from every home inside. That's why you got weather radios, your mobile alerts and the like. Have multiple ways to get alerts. But, sometimes those campgrounds, sirens probably would really help, I would think, in theory. But as we go ahead and just continue to track things here, we're going to start to wrap things up unless we see some type of warning out of this here in southeast Georgia, which I'd be surprised to see at this time of hour, this, time of day, but I don't really see enough to get that close to a warning. But there's a little bit of wind enhancement. It gets to 40 possible around Hoboken there in southeast Georgia. I know in Texas there is severe thunderstorm acts in there west of Abilene. I know they got hit pretty hard. A TV station impacted there earlier on. In past weeks there was some damage, major damage. And then as you look here toward the south, we'll have to see how much of this kind of gets down toward these hard-hit areas of devastation, toward Kirk County, Hunt and Ingram and those areas that we had Camp Mystic in, because that can impact, recovery and rescue efforts. But as we go ahead and look here toward Virginia, there's some flash flood warnings here. Continue out that way. You see purple there, a couple inches of rain in the last hour as you look out that way. And some of those urban areas or more concrete areas, more vulnerable areas could have problems. So I'd keep that in mind. Let me see if there are any questions or comments from any of the viewers at home. We're about to wrap things up here on this late Tuesday, early Wednesday. Just going to see if there's any questions or comments. Bear with me here. Just bear with me. I don't see any, but I appreciate everybody tuning in here tonight. See a few viewers there over on Twitter/X. Maybe more than we generally have over there, but we do have some on YouTube and some of those platforms here, in general here that we are on. We do have some folks watching at this late hour. Again, just a terrible tragedy toward Texas. They're just total, devastation situation full of heartbreak. At least 110 dead out there as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things here. That's the latest number. Of course, that number is rapidly changing. Media reports rapidly evolving on that, and the reports from the, government officials, the emergency officials there, and the like. So, absolute heartbreak. You need to have a weather radio, and those alerts, as flash flood warnings, tornado warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings. They'll go off on that. You can program it just to your county, depending on what you have with the model. More urgent concern, set off by those weather radios and the alerts there in, situations like flash floods, ones with that potential starting to become a likely reality, like what ended up happening there. Always remember, turn around, don't drown. About flooded roadways. That's why a lot of people can lose their life in flash flooding. But in this case, the water just came up 20-something feet here, 2 hours. That's why, again, if you get that alert, move to higher ground. Just so many folks weren't able to get that alert. The phones, I assume, the alerts just probably, Weather Service did a great job there, Austin, San Antonio, but if you're not getting cell service, you're not going to get the alert there in the middle of the night, especially if you're asleep. I mean, if you have poor cell service, it might not go through, if maybe you have just a little during the day and you're looking at the river, it's a lot different than at night. A holiday, it's the worst case scenario. Lives change forever. Families just broken apart. Some families just, in some cases, I mean, I hate to even say this, some families, now gone because of the flooding. It's just, tragic and awful and heartbreaking, out there toward Texas. I mean, and then some folks losing, young child and they have to deal with that for the rest of their life. It's just absolutely heartbreaking, absolutely awful. It's just tragic and terrible and something that, it's just going to be, hurting people forever out there toward that Lone Star State and toward Texas, Central Texas. My thoughts and prayers go out to everybody impacted during this devastating situation. Try to have a good night, but again, it's just awful, awful for Texas there and those poor people.